Right, welcome to Lift History. I'm happy to have another vintage weights collector here with me, Noam Schwartz. Welcome.
Welcome.
So, Noam, you've been collecting for longer than I have,
Mhm.
and the reason I invited you on was that I was thinking through like different people I've interacted with in this vintage weights and strength history community, and some of the more impressive posts that I've read in Facebook groups have come from you. Like you've found different things, different vintage weights and different you know, people throughout strength history that you really connect with, and then you dig in and you do your research, and I really like that and respect that. So thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. I appreciate that.
So that's my background getting to know you, but could you just
Mhm.
tell a little bit about yourself? Like, how'd you get into just having a
Sure.
home gym? How'd you get into collecting old weights?
Yeah. So I've been weightlifting for over 20 years since I was 11. I've always had a passion for fitness and weightlifting. Um, and I guess, during COVID, didn't have a gym to go to. So started to assemble a home gym, stumbled upon an old Weeder adjustable rack for like $50,
Nice.
inexpensive. I was gonna piece together my gym on a budget, and then next thing I know, the next day there was this huge package deal that had like dumbbells, plates, a bar, a different adjustable rack, and a bench for even less than that. And so I immediately was like, I got to go get this. I can
Yeah.
sell the first one innocently
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
lower my gym cost basis. And then I kind of realized, oh, wow, I could do this and really like make my gym free. And it kind of jump started my flipping career,
Sure.
which is taboo in the home gym community and the vintage weights community. But it's actually something I'm very proud of because I just considered it hustling. I was
Yeah.
operating ethically, both paying people, what they were listing for, and then actually selling below market. That was my niche.
Ah.
Um, and I had some friends that were doing the same thing
Mhm.
that I met via the whole flipping, making your own network. Some of them even, went to my wedding,
Nice.
and they had mentioned to me about vintage weights. One of them was kind of into it already, a guy that goes by the name of David Silver, but
Ah.
I just needed to know the prices. That's all I cared about.
Sure. Yeah.
And then one day I go to a pickup, and I knew that there was a York 100 there. I just figured it's a plate, $2 a pound, York 100, but it ended up being a York Globe.
Ooh.
And I was like, this is the most beautiful, weight I've ever seen. I can't sell this. I just
Yeah.
like stared at it. And then I just thought to myself, like, I want to know the history about this kind of dumbbell. I want to know about York Barbell. So I joined Vintage York Barbell on Facebook, and I started to learn, and it was really exciting to me.
That's awesome. And yeah, if you're watching the podcast, I know some people are listening, but if you're watching the podcast and look on the floor, there's some globe dumbbells right behind Noam.
Mhm.
And I'll be asking him, sure enough, in this episode about some of his recent acquisitions. But the main thing that I wanted to bring you on for was to talk about Dan Lurie, because when I was first getting into Dan Lurie plates and trying to learn a little bit more about him, you wrote a great post. It was like
Yeah.
within like weeks of me first kind of my interest peaking, and I was like, oh my gosh, it was like served up on a platter. You wrote this long post about the address plates and things. So, could you just give like a little primer, if you will? Like what's to someone
Oh
who's
yeah.
never heard of Dan Lurie, who was this guy?
Well, yeah. But let me actually backtrack.
Sure.
So, so for me, weightlifting started with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh yeah.
That's my idol. And I've always been drawn to that time period of fitness, West Coast, golden era of bodybuilding. I watched Pumping Iron when I was like 10. That's what got me into the whole thing.
Absolutely.
I love the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. And I was kind of like looking up all materials I could find, interviews, documentaries on that time period. So Vintage Weights kind of merged my affinity for fitness and weightlifting with the history of physical culture. And then it opened up a whole period of time before Arnold that I didn't know about previously.
Yeah.
And I kind of like to say that all the weightlifting disciplines of today, powerlifting, bodybuilding, strongman, they all share a family tree. They all were like the same back in the days when York was like the big player. And so Dan Lurie was someone I never heard of, but I saw his name on one of the plates that I picked up. And I thought it was really cool because it said an address. It said, 1729 Rockaway Parkway,
You got an
Brooklyn.
address plate right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, I had
Wow.
seen Dan Lurie, but they didn't do anything for me. I noted the Brooklyn,
Nice.
but then I saw the address
Oh,
plates and
that's
I
cool.
said, I got to get these plates because, this time period is actually when my family was in Brooklyn. My family came, I think, before Ellis Island. I'm like a fifth generation American. And they landed in Brooklyn.
Nice.
And my late grandfather, was born in 1925. Dan Lurie was born in 1923. They grew up during the Depression. Things were very bad. And then, Dan Lurie was selling weights around the corner from where my family lived. Now I'm the first person to lift weights in my family, but
Yeah.
I just thought the connection was cool. Dan Lurie's also
That's awesome.
Jewish. So I just said, I want to learn about this guy, Dan Lurie.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of personal connections. Like one of my favorite finds or my Power Master deep dish, and that just because they're from Pittsburgh and I
Mm-hmm.
love my city of Pittsburgh, and then I've been digging into trying to figure out like where'd they come from, what are they, and just recently I'll have a video out soon on my YouTube channel that I finally found out that and confirmed that Power Master was a gym, and it was
Wow.
like an old school gym in the late 60s throughout the 70s into the 80s, and they had their own plates and equipment made. So anyway, yeah, I
No, that's
just
pretty cool.
anytime you connect personally with the equipment and with the weights, it just adds more than a monetary value to it. It's
Oh,
cool.
definitely. I connect everything I have with like some sort of angle
Yeah,
of sentimental value.
absolutely. Like I remember you were doing a PR bench press one
Mhm.
time, but you like meticulously planned out like what plates would be on the
Well,
bar. Like
I had to pick from my top six. I like these six plates, and I was like, well, Jackson's from New Jersey.
there you go.
I love the Shizzler Eagles because they just look badass.
I do too.
Paramount and BF Co. are the
Uh-huh.
plates that Arnold lifted with, whether he was in Gold's Gym or Muscle Beach. Then there's the iconic York, and then there's the Dan Lurie deep dish. So I was like, I got to pick four.
It's tough. It's tough when
Yeah,
you have so many alike. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, it's a nice problem to
yeah.
have. I'm
Sure.
sure there's people listening there like, oh, poor baby. Like, oh, you got to pick. So, okay. So Dan Lurie, he's in Brooklyn. He's making weights. Is this something that I was thinking about was in the timeline of things? Because I know he was a competitive lifter. Was it after he had made a name for himself that then he
Yeah,
strikes
no,
out?
so I'm really familiar with the Dan Lurie
Okay.
story. So in Brooklyn, a lot of siblings kind of crowded under one roof, working for his dad's moving company. When he was 16, he picked up boxing. He seemed to be more fit than all of his siblings, kind of like a lean cut and gritty.
Hmm.
And he was boxing at 16, and that was like the late 1930s. And then he was going to compete professionally, but he had a heart murmur and couldn't go through with the match at
Oh,
18. So he kind of shifted to bodybuilding. He already
okay.
had the leanness and the cutness, and that was
Yeah.
like a big thing back then. So then he becomes a bodybuilder, and he's competing in. They had AAU championships back
Yeah.
then, and
Sure.
he got second place. But back in those days, you're still called second place is gives a title of like Mr. America or something
Yeah.
like that.
That was long before Weeder split off and
Oh yeah, this is
IFBB even existed. Yeah.
1942. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so he does make a name for himself and act. But actually, funny enough, Weeder contacts him because Weeder's like, starting to publish his magazine in Canada. And I think Lurie was 19. Weider was only like, 21,
Yeah.
22. And he says, like, you should do some modeling in my magazine. And so Dan Lurie competed at like the highest bodybuilding competition in America for 3 straight years. He technically got second in all
Really?
three. And he claims that like one of the people he lost to, I think Steve Stamko, like was backed by Bob Hoffman, and like sometimes there was a lot of politics, but he still made
some
a
shady
name for
business.
himself
Yeah.
by being a bodybuilder, by being in Weider's Your Physique magazine.
Sure.
So then at the same time, Weider wants to sell his weights in America, because I was actually reading Weider's book, and Weider basically said, as a magazine publisher, you couldn't make profit. You needed advertisements, but no weights or fitness people wanted to pay. So he had to basically decide to sell fitness products, because people would read his magazine and say, I want the weights.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I got to fulfill their need, and I got to find a new income stream. But he couldn't sell them in the US without having to pay the tariffs. And this is 1943. So he gets Dan Lurie to basically find a local foundry and just fulfill all the orders of Weider Barbell in America.
So Lurie was his like United States contact.
Yeah. So Dan Lurie named his company Dan Lurie Barbell Company, but he only produced Weider weights. Weider would send him the wooden patterns that make the molds at the foundry. And I think I read that he found a foundry that was willing to produce everything for like 8 cents a pound.
Wow. I can't imagine. So, I mean, they, we'll get into it, but you were talking about finding the standards, and early on when I first started getting into vintage weights, I had kind of a similar thing that I would just pick up these hauls of weights that people had listed, and I'd go through and I'd just see a name I'd never seen before, and I just started Googling like, okay, who was Billard, who was Dan Lurie, who was Healthways, where'd these companies come from?
Yeah,
so
there's so many actually back then.
Well, and then you start to notice too the ones that have so many differences, like Healthways, for example. Oh my gosh, Healthways has a bazillion different patterns and lettering and things. And same with Dan Lurie. There's differences between his USA made plates, and then he shifted over C's. So starting out with the standards, you mentioned already the address. That one of the coolest things, I said this recently to someone, that I think it's just a really easy like search, because you're searching for Dan Lurie plates and you're zooming in and seeing if there's a street address. So it's just a fun thing to go search for.
Oh yeah, because they're much more rare.
Yeah, and I've found a couple pair in my time of collecting. But can you give us a little backstory on like the streets, like what?
Oh yeah.
So basically, it's where he lived, right, at the time that he's making them.
To continue the story, so then it's a couple of years in 1947. Dan Lurie claimed that they had 100,000 in revenue, which is a lot back then. That's a lot of money. And like I said, Weider would put the advertisements in his magazine, but it would be Dan Lurie would be the one like fulfilling the orders. So then at the end of that year, Weider, I guess he moved to the US, opened up an office in the US in Jersey City. And he just changed the address in his magazine. And so Dan Lurie thought, is this a mistake? What's going on? And Weider said, oh, it's a printing error. And like Dan Lurie continued, he had plenty of orders to fill. So he kept filling orders. And then 3 issues go by of the magazine, and the address hasn't changed. And keep in mind, the year prior, Dan Lurie got married and had a son, and Weider was at the wedding and was the godfather to the son. But then he just basically, with that move of changing the address, he cut Weider out. Now he cut Lurie out. Weider's side will say that Dan Lurie's accounting wasn't adding up. That's what in Weider's book he basically says something along those lines. But so then once Dan Lurie realized like his stuff his name is gone from the advertisements, he already had the connections at the foundry. So he had to, start from scratch making his own weights in his parents' basement. So 1729 Rockaway Parkway is his home address that he grew up in since he
Wow.
was, shortly after he was born. And he just turned his basement into his like shipping, place.
Interesting.
And that's why
So,
that's the first plate, 1948, when post split, he came to market with those plates. Now, any plate that's kind of like similar, that's unmarked could be from 1948, but he would go on to making that style like all the way to the 60s. So you can't really date any of them
yeah,
besides the specific ones with the address.
gotcha. So
And then
that's the oldest address, the Rockaway.
Rockaway. And then the funny thing is, the next year, Dan Lurie got a $18,000 wartime tax bill for all of his operations between 43 and 47. And he went to Weider and he was like, we're splitting this tax bill. And Weider just laughed at him and said, why do you think I had you put the company in your name? I'm not paying anything. So he was almost bankrupt a year in with that tax bill.
I keep smiling and shaking my head sadly in belief, because these stories about Weider, and his business
I know, and Weider was
practices.
like I always just loved Weider because I knew him as the guy who found Arnold
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger and the founder of bodybuilding. So I was like, I love that guy
Yeah.
because I identify more with bodybuilding. That's the kind of weightlifting I've been doing for
Yeah.
20 years. And like I said, Arnold was my idol. So I thought Weider was the man. And now you hear all these stories of him doing
Yeah.
business practices.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of viral videos and YouTube videos and documentaries you can watch about like who found Arnold Schwarzenegger. The recent
It's
one
like
though,
very conflicting info. Dan
yeah,
Lurie's book
exactly.
and Weider's book. And
Brothers
it's like,
Byron.
yeah. Now, they talk about a lot of the stuff besides weights manufacturing, that there's like very faint details about that in there because they both did a lot of other stuff. But it's just funny. They clearly never reconciled their whole lives.
And it's just the kind of thing that in that time and era, it was pencil and paper bookkeeping. So who knows at this point?
Exactly.
It's not like we can get some type of auditor or something to go back and try to figure out who did what.
Yeah.
But based on the track record of Weider, personally, I'm leaning a little more towards Larry's side in the
Mhm.
story, because it's just even just Arnold. That's what I was going to say about Arnold, is that Weider frequently would state how he found Arnold, but I mean, the more accurate statement is that he brought Arnold to the United
In
States.
Arnold's book, which I also, read because I love learning
Oh
everything
yeah.
about Arnold. He basically says like he was doing his own weightlifting,
Mhm.
and then Weider was like, Arnold's using my principles, but it was like it was mutual.
Yeah,
Arnold loved the spotlight. He was getting benefits by the publicity, so he
sure.
didn't care. He just said, "Yeah, I'm using his stuff." But Arnold was doing his totally own weightlifting regimen. But Weider just took credit and said, "Like I built up Arnold using my principles."
Wow. It's I mean, I think truth can be said that Weider backed him. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
he provided the means with which, and the, you know, the sustenance, the backing and the time at the gym for him to, put in those hours. But
Arnold was just
Arnold did the
on
work.
yeah, Arnold was just on the New Heights podcast with the Kelsey brothers. And
Oh, I've got to listen.
yeah, he always says he's not a self-made man, which is
Yeah,
a cool quote. And then
it
he
is.
like credits people like Weider for
Sure.
how he's successful. So like he's very humble and credits Weider. So like clearly Weider did good things.
Oh yeah.
But in terms of his battles with like Andy Jackson and
Yeah.
Dan Lurie,
Yeah.
clearly there was some shady
I
stuff.
mean, on Home Gym History, my other podcast, Ed Cohen was on, and he was talking about Weider and how he had a blast. Weider would bring him out to, do some photo shoots and stuff, and write an article about powerlifting and things, and
Mhm.
so that, yeah, I agree. He clearly was a savvy businessman and did a lot of good things. I'm blanking on the name of it, but there was a Weider movie made.
Oh,
You probably know.
bigger, bigger.
Bigger. Yeah, bigger.
It's
Even
if
if
you
you just
want to
watch
learn about
bigger.
Weeder's history,
Yeah.
it's a great movie for that. It's like an awful movie, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was funny. Like
If
not a
you're
good
into this
movie,
stuff,
but if you're
yeah.
into this stuff, you
Yeah.
will like it.
Absolutely. That's exactly how I'd phrase it. Like if I met someone and they don't lift weights and they don't really care about strength history, I would never suggest it. But if you're listening to this podcast, it's fair to say you'd probably like bigger
Because they even have
movie.
a fake villain slash like he's supposed to embody Bob Hoffman,
Yep,
the other guy in that movie. They don't say
exactly.
Bob Hoffman, but
But he takes on I mean, he's physically bigger than Weeder in the movie. I mean,
he's
it's
got his
clearly,
own magazine, he's
yeah,
got his
he's
own
tied to
lifters, he
AAU.
sponsors his own bodybuilders. Like that's what they did. So in Lurie's book, he claims that there's a quote that basically says back then there was only like York Barbell, Weeder, and him. That's
Hmm.
he likens himself to those two. I don't know
Yeah.
if he was quite there, maybe on the in the east northeast, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is before, Amazon one day delivery that we live in today. In his region, I'm sure he saw himself, you
Mhm.
know, at a certain point in his career
Oh
as
yeah,
being up
well,
there.
I'll continue with the plates, and
Yeah.
then
I was just going to say, so let's bring it on
he
back.
did
Yeah.
get pretty big at the end. So 1948, Rockaway, parents' basement. Then, like the next year, it was just too much in the basement. So he found a store on Bristol Street.
Mhm.
What's the address there? It's 52 Bristol Street. Yeah, you have the 25. So I
I
could
was just
never
going to
find
say,
the
I have the
10.
25s. I was reaching back to see which one I put back here. I have Utica back here, but I'm going to drop pictures in of all kinds of
Oh yeah,
weights.
I can send you some
And
pictures.
yeah, so I'll drop pictures in before I push this
And
out.
Bristol
But
Street was more like a showroom, but
okay.
it had some room. I think he continued in the parents' basement, but now he had a showroom to show some full sets,
Mhm.
have direct a little more traffic. And keep in mind, he's only like he's still like under 30 years old doing
Yeah,
this. He also
not
owned a
bad.
gym. Um, he owned a gym, so the gym was Pitkin, and Pitkin
Ah,
he had the gym since 47. So even before he branched away from Weeder and made his own plates, he had this gym on Pitkin Ave. Um, so it's kind of unclear when that Pitkin plate came about. It's probably the second most rare after the Rockaways.
okay.
And he was, in that gym since 47, but he wasn't making the weights in 47.
I see.
So, I think that gym was called like Dan Lurie's Physical Culture Studio.
Yeah.
It had ping pong tables. It was like a health club. They don't have the same types of little health studios I think anymore, but it was a cool little place. And he went on to
Yeah.
own a bunch of gyms.
Well, it's kind of that was a common thing in that era was to have not just some weights and some things to work out with, but it was a whole kind of picture, which I guess some commercial gyms have like a sauna, have certain things.
That's true. That's true.
So along those lines, so if I'm backtracking, Rockaway was his parents' house that he grew up in. Bristol Street was the
Was this
showroom,
the
and
first
then the
showroom? Pitkin was
Pitkin
the
was the
gym.
gym. Nice, very cool.
Like debatable which plate came first, Pitkin or
Yeah.
Bristol, but Pitkin
Okay.
is definitely more rare.
Okay. So if you find a Pitkin, that's a score.
Yeah,
Nice. Well, any of them are a score, but it's a bigger score if you find a Pitkin. So then where do we go
I
from
can't
there?
find a 10-pound Bristol. I have
I've
a
seen your
25
in search
and
ofs.
a 35, and I'm willing to like pay money for it because I want
Yeah.
tens of every address. I just
Okay.
don't know if it was ever made.
So if anybody finds a 10
Yeah,
pound Bristol Street, you have an easy mark here.
exactly.
You've got a man who's ready to, reach out for that weight. Nice. We'll
And
see.
then the next one is the Utica Ave, which
Utica.
is that's the one you have
Yeah, that's the one I have.
1661 Utica Ave.
Yeah.
That's when he moved to a much bigger storefront. Yeah, that's a nice one.
Yeah. Well, it came from you. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
And I just, well, to go back to Power Masters, my Pittsburgh plates that I love, one of the reasons I love about them is that they have the full address on them. So it's Monroeville, PA, and it's got the zip code. So it's just a lot of lettering. I like a busy plate.
Oh, those are
So,
pretty busy. Yeah.
and that's with the street address plates, the Dan Lurie plates. I think it's cool that there's just so much going on when
Hmm.
you look at them. So yeah,
And it's
it's
unclear why he chose to just do limited runs of full street address,
mhm.
whereas he also, did many of the plates on with just Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Never know why like there's a difference, but we all know that the address ones are much more rare.
Well, setting aside the lettering, something I really like about the standard Dan Luries is the kind of flare on the lip.
Mhm.
It's not like a typical York standard plate or the Healthway standard plates I mentioned. Even the Weeder one-sided plates, they all have a very distinct, like hard turn on the inside of the lip. Whereas the Lurie standard plates almost have like a, I guess I called it a flare just a second ago, but it's almost like a slope that goes from the face of the plate
Yep,
upwards. So I just think they're comfortable in hand.
they
And
are.
recently, Grant from Strength Co. He had been asking me about standard plates because he partnered with CT Fletcher to try to put out, and they're still currently working on trying to put out a made in the USA uh, pig iron, CT Fletcher's pig iron standard plate. And I mentioned the Dan Lurie plates. I said, well, as far as the edge of them, I think this is really nice. Like this is comfortable in your hands. It's not something that you can find right now in terms of a plate that's shaped like that. So I don't know if he'll run with it or not, but that was long before inviting you onto the podcast. That was something that I just admired about the plates, in addition to the cool kind of history
Mhm.
behind the street address.
And
So
the
then,
50s are like huge. They're
oh yeah.
real thick.
Well, that
Yeah.
was on my notes too. So you're collecting the 10 pounder, but what's the upper end all the way down? Do we go up to 100? Do we stop at 50?
Of that style with the little lip that you were talking about,
Yeah.
there's 10s, 25, there's
Okay.
2.5s, 5s, 10s.
Gotcha.
There is a 12.5 and a 20, and there is a 35. The 20 and the 35 are rare, and then there's 50. But
Mhm.
only the 50s, 25s, and the 10s have addresses.
Good to
And
know. So
and one weird 35 that's like a little different.
it's a rare one.
Yeah.
So more commonly, you'll find 50, 25, and 10s with addresses. Good to know.
This one's like a little bit different.
Oh, check this out. Okay. Yeah. So that's a fairly common 35-pound
It's like
casting.
a
That,
weeder mold, you know?
yeah, Weeder Jackson has a similar ish.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, but then it's got an address on it.
And I was like amazed to find it. At first I had the only pair for a while,
Yeah.
but
So as
then
another pair popped up.
another one popped up.
Mm.
50's too heavy.
I wonder. Yeah, it makes me wonder why was that just a test run and then they decided against it? Like why just a,
I wish I knew. I wish
yeah.
I knew. It's
Maybe
tough
people
because
just weren't using 35s as much and they all went to the scrapyard. Who
I
knows?
reached out to Dan Lurie's family at one point and
Oh
like
wow.
they thought it was really cool my collection, but like they weren't really interested
Yeah,
in that kind of stuff, and there was family issues there, so
gotcha.
we'll never know.
He was active, I know, all the way through his elderly years, in terms of being like on the strength scene, like the organization that used to put on banquets and kind of get-togethers, the old time. I'm gonna mess up the name, like old time barbell.
Mhm.
Uh,
ABOS or something.
yes, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll see if I can track down the name and drop it in the description here. I have some of their old programs and mailings and stuff. Well, in any case, Bert Soren mentioned to me that at he went to one of those when
Oh
he was
wow.
like younger with his father, and his father just said, "Hey, they're having a one of their dinners."
Hmm.
And people would set up booths at these events, so it was kind of like an expo, if you will, going on. And he said it was amazing because he said, "Yeah, I like look to my left, and Dan Lurie's like sitting at a table,
That
and
is
it's
pretty
like
cool.
so cool to like walk up and just meet Dan Lurie, like hanging out." So I kind of wish those that I wish that organization was still around, and I wish they were still putting on those
I
events.
agree. That would have been really cool.
Like I'd travel and go to one of those events. That'd be amazing. But it's interesting to kind of trace through the history. So Utica, I know that's a street
But
name that
that's
I've
and
had.
I'll give you a good picture. It's like a public picture on Google.
Okay.
That was like his main storefront from,
All
I
right.
think he moved there in 1955
Uh,
until like 1980. And it was like a little brick building. They put a picture of him out front on it, like doing
nice.
a double flex. And he had both the showroom and the weights there because it was much bigger than
Okay.
anything he had prior. And that's where he
Mm.
was for like the next 25, 30 years. And that's when he went on to like have his own TV show where he just
Mm.
did like weird strength feats of strength, and he got very big from that. He was a bodybuilding promoter. um, he claims that he came up with the title IFBB and that the Weeder
Okay.
stole it from him, but he didn't get anywhere with that claim. And there is
Interesting.
like proof in a pamphlet that like Dan Lurie's IFBB, but they won that battle. And so he
Huh.
created the World Bodybuilding Guild, which was like a big thing back then. It
Yeah.
eventually faded away, and
Okay.
IFBB ended up being the main thing. And then he was so big that he actually ended up, for whatever reason, getting invited to arm wrestle Ronald Reagan when Ronald Reagan was president. And
Wow.
it was like
Okay.
this big thing on television.
Lurie, I mean, by that point, how old was he? He had to be up there in the years.
Oh, he didn't look like strong or anything. He was like an
But
old
his
man.
it kind of speaks to his reputation, though, that he still was
Yeah.
seen as this like, presence of strength that he'd, come arm wrestle the president.
But the sad part is, after at some point in probably the 1960s, as you know, he just like straight off to do all those different variations of Dan
Yeah.
Lurie plates. And that is mass produced. Like
There's a
after the
ton.
original mold that you were just describing with the lip, and some of them are address, some of them are not. Any other variation is probably produced overseas. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, a lot of people were doing that back then,
Yeah.
but there's just too many variations now. The one that everyone does like still are those cartoon letter plates,
Yep.
because the 100 is like the biggest plate
Yeah.
you've ever seen. But I didn't bother collecting all the variations because there's just too many.
I do like the cartoon letter, the circus
Yeah,
letter, sometimes I call them. Um,
yeah,
I've had, I just offloaded the 50 pounders that I've had, but
I saw that. Yeah.
I just posted a little video on my Instagram because they are about the diameter of a 25-pound plate, but they're
Hmm.
50 pounders. So they're the thickness of two 25-pound plates. So I
Wow.
posted a little video next to like a Strength Co 45 with the little tiny
Yeah,
diameter
yeah.
50 pounder. So it's just comical. It's kind of funny how thick they are. So I used to pick them up and hold them for grip strength, one in each hand, and see how long I could hold them. And it was just kind of cool if you put them both on the end of a standard bar, you were doing like a really long pull for a deadlift if you stacked up a bunch of 25s in those. So
Yeah,
I used
definitely.
to occasionally I'd just mess around with them. But on the opposite end, instead of being smaller diameter and super thick, the circus letter hundreds, like you mentioned, they look like a wagon wheel.
They really do.
They're
And
huge.
I didn't know what to do with them. I ended up moving on from them
Oh, you
because
did have a pair?
I had two pairs. And
Oh wow.
believe it or not, this is just a funny side note about like weird weightlifting stories. Someone wanted them, and it was just like a $2 a pound deal. But I said, I don't know how to ship this thing. This is crazy. This is the
Yeah,
biggest plate ever. And I was kind of new to shipping at that point.
sure.
And so they sent me custom made boxes that perfectly fit, because I guess they already actually had some. So they
Nice.
made two boxes, but then in the boxes, they gave me labels, they gave me a box cutter, and they gave me tape. And it was just like the package arrived, and all I
Wow.
had to do was open it. I had all the materials, and then I just closed it.
That's amazing.
And I was like, this is pretty cool. So I went
Yeah.
through with that shipping, kind of miss having them, but I don't know what I would have done with them. They're just like too big. I don't have a big gym
Yeah.
here.
If I came across them in the wild cheap, I'd pick them up. I don't think I'd spend any significant money on them or
Yeah.
trade anything significant, but they are cool looking. Um, I always see Alex with his.
Mhm.
Feats of Alex on Instagram. He has some, and I
Yeah.
see him lifting them sometimes. So, yeah, I recently 35-pound deep dish Yorks. Um, Lazy old fucker.
Yeah.
My favorite Instagram account, Jokabug Lazy Old Fucker, mailed me 35-pound deep dish Yorks in custom made wooden crates. So it was the only
Oh,
time I've
custom
ever
made wooden crate.
received
Wow.
crates, like wooden crates, delivered to me, and it was just really cool. So I still have them, and someone, I don't know, at some point I'm going to trade or sell a pair of 35-pound plates, not necessarily the Yorks, and someone will receive them in some pretty sweet wooden crates that I have sit in
Oh,
my
you
garage. I kept them
kept
because I
them?
think they're awesome. Yeah. I felt like it was Jurassic Park or something. I was like opening up something, something crazy, some Indiana
That is
Jones
pretty cool.
like crate. So as far as collecting, the circus letters aren't high on my list, but they were fun.
That's
And
what I advise people. I say you've got your original style.
yeah,
Some have addresses, some don't, but that's like the original line. And
yeah,
then you've got your circus letter 100s, maybe the 50s. Other than that, like it basically comes all the way back down to just like commodity weight prices of any 1 inch, whatever 1 inch sells in
yeah.
your local market, you're not going to get much more.
Now those are the 1 inch plates. I've had Dan Lurie deep dish,
Yeah,
and I recently got rid
real.
of them, and I gotta admit, of the things that I've gotten rid of in the last year, they're pretty high on the list of ones that I miss. I'll probably get them again because they have really big letters. I'll drop a picture in here. Huge lettering, Dan Lurie, that I just really like, but they were made overseas.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, there's only like one generation of deep dish, like Olympic plates. Am I correct in that? From what you know?
I randomly have seen like one or two weird styles, and I've
Oh,
literally seen
really?
like those one or two weird styles once, like
Okay.
this style and this style. But yeah, it's really just that common one. I
Okay.
happen to. That's like the one full set I have. I'm more of a
Nice.
45 snob. I like my
Yeah.
45s, but I actually kept the full Dan Lurie set because it was a really nice pickup. And like, there's an ad that literally I got the set that's from the ad, so I like lined it up to look exactly like the pictures in the ad, and I thought that
Uh,
was cool.
that is cool. Yeah, I only had the 45s, and the particular ones I had, I also really I missed them because they just had a really weathered, like cool vintage look to them, like the original
Mhm.
paint. It was just worn in like a good way. I didn't want to repaint them or anything. I just left them the way they are. So you've got the standards with the street addresses, the circus letters, you got 2 inch Olympic deep dish. The only other thing I'd mention with Lurie is that there were some cool collars that I've seen. They were reminiscent of York collars and things for the standard bars that have Dan Lurie on them. Am I might be making this up, but were the street address on any collars
Yeah,
to
yeah.
best of your
There's
knowledge? Okay. So
there's
they
two.
were. I thought I remembered seeing collars that had the street address on them.
There's just Bristol. Well, as we know, because things can always
Okay.
turn up. There's just
Oh, look at
Bristol.
that. Okay.
I don't know if it's clear,
It
and then
is.
there's a
Yeah.
Utica one.
Bristol
So
and Utica.
yeah,
Very cool. So those are the last two. Or no, not the last two. Those are the showrooms, I should say.
yeah, they are the last two
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, there's the two showrooms, and then there's a couple other variations of collars which are cool.
Okay. Yeah, I've I haven't gone off the deep end with collars, but I do like them a lot. Like, I mean, like Efren showed in his video when he had Brian Shaw over at his place. He went off the deep end with collars. He's got a
42
humongous.
pairs of the deep
Oh,
dish.
it's
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
the hip wheels.
Ship wheels. Yeah. I haven't gone off the deep end to that extent, at least not yet, but I do appreciate them. Like I really like them. There's just something about barbell collars that's just kind of like in the wild, they always seem to be a surprise to me. Like they always seem to be something that when I show up, someone says, "Oh, hey, you can have these too." And they hand me a pair of collars and
Now,
I'm like,
are you talking
"Whoa,
about Olympic or 1 inch?
both."
Any?
I think both. I mean, we were talking about personal stories and things, and my absolute favorite collars are the ones that CT Fletcher gifted me, the hold tights.
Oh, those are awesome. They're very cool.
And I mean, not only because they're just a rare collar and it's just a really unique and cool collar, the concept of them, York put them out, and I believe they were with the one-sided standards. I got to double check that.
Mhm.
But um and basically you would then clamp down instead of having to use a wrench and tighten down.
And those
And
come in two. Those are they come in brass and
yep,
I think steel, and the brass are the early ones.
are the early ones. That's right. And then it says on them patent applied for, which is
Yeah.
just weird to me. Like, I think it's funny that they put that on them, patent applied for. And then just the personal connection. Like it's just cool that CT gifted them to me. So it's something that gives it an added just personal kind of value. And then these were free. These came along.
Those say Mansfield or whatever.
They're
Yeah.
Billard.
Oh, Billard, New York City.
Yep, Billard, New York City, and they're their lock fast collars. So they
Mhm.
twist on the top. So I don't know. The variety of collars I think is really neat. The different things that they came up with, and even newer ones like Instagram man who parks and gym, Jason.
Mhm.
He loves these particular collars, and he
Oh,
sent me his oldest. Me and Keith Honeycutt, he gifted some SMI ones, the older ones that he had because he bought kind of these newer ones. So I never messed around with them until this week when he sent them to me, but they're fun. You can like throw them on the barbell basically, and they'll slide down and lock in place. They're magnetic on the end. So, and then you pull to release.
they're not vintage, but they're like new.
They're newer. I mean, but a lot of people would argue with you if you called them vintage
Got it.
of the style, because like Juju Mufu sells this
Got
style basically right now. But of the style, these, to my knowledge, are some of the older, the SMI incorporated. But I would hesitate to say they're vintage like we would call these vintage, put it that way. But I
I
mean,
this is
it's all an opinionated thing
but I
at
made
a
a
certain
little
point.
shelf for my collars, if you can
Nice.
see. And like I like the fact that the Billard, I have the Billards that say Billard, New York City. I have the
Yeah.
smaller ones that say Mansfield, PA.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to like put together a little kind of, I call it the tri-state collar collection because I'm trying to get like Reading, Good, York,
Okay.
uh, Dan Lurie, Jackson.
Man, it's gonna be
Trying to get them
tough.
all because the ones that I like, naturally, I just the something about the address on plate, and I have some other Jacksons, but like this is the Burr collar, you know the Burr collar, the
Yeah.
Lyndhurst, New Jersey. But then Jackson
Hmm.
had one that looks exactly the same with his Springfield, New Jersey address,
Ah, he did.
and then
Look
I've
at
been
that.
trying to track down
Yeah.
one that is exactly like this, but it says
Uh-huh.
Dan Lurie, Brooklyn, and I'm like, did these come from the same spot?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
pretty damn similar.
They are. They are.
So
Yeah, I think something that you do with your collection I think is cool is you kind of have these little themes going on.
yeah,
Like
I do. I
I
do.
sent you a Thor plate for your Avengers.
Yeah, yeah. I love the like I told you, I have a sentimental angle for
Yeah.
everything. And I always preach like what you like. Like
Yeah.
I say, my favorite quote, and it's like a funny jab. I say, ignore the iron elitists, because there are a lot of iron
Sure.
elitists in our community that are like, no, that's better than that.
Yeah,
That's not collectible. Like, no, anything's collectible if you like it.
absolutely. And I think, it's your gym. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I started a home gym because I wanted a space that had everything I liked in it. And I didn't want to deal with going to a commercial gym
Yeah.
anymore. So why wouldn't I put stuff that I like in it? Who cares what it's worth monetarily or whether someone else thinks that it's the best or not or whatever. So yeah, kind of like man who parks in gym with these
Yeah, those are
these
awesome.
collars. He likes them. So he's had these things for years. He educated me on them. I said I found like a generic pair of them and posted on Instagram like, "Hey, I've never seen these before." And boom, he gave me like the history and he's been using them for years. So, yeah, find what you like. The collars that I think would be really cool to find,
Hmm.
these are a really cheap version. This is a very commonly found 1 inch. I wouldn't say very commonly found, but it's from diversified products And I think they're just kind of fun. They're a 1 inch standard spin lock, but Jackson made
Oh, he has that.
smaller spin locks. And
They're
so
very
like
tough to find.
I think even number 5 set recently, Nate Deep Dish Globes on Instagram, he was saying to me that number 5 there was a spin lock. And how cool would that be to find some of those, go to someone cleaning out their basement and there's just like a tiny little spin lock with Jackson on it. That'd be awesome. What's as far as like in the wild, have you had anything that stands out over the years that was
Hmm.
just like you couldn't believe it happened?
Well, I got my first York deep dish by going to, so I went to go pick up some 100-pound round heads.
Okay.
Turned out it was like a high school football coach. And then he claimed that he had some a really, variety of plates, York plates. I showed him pictures of like bumpers and deep dish. He's like, yeah, I have those. I didn't know for like a month if he really like had them. And
Yeah.
then I go to like this high school football gym in New Jersey, and like sure enough, they've got like 1,000 pounds of York milled, but they had one pair of deep dish,
Nice.
some bump. I kept the blue bumpers, the 20 kg, and
Okay,
I
yeah.
kept the deep dish, and then there was a lot more that I bought, and then sold some to lower the cost basis. But your first deep dish in the wild um,
It's
is
memorable.
always memorable. And then
Yeah.
my recent pickup of first I got the 125-pound Jacksons, which
Oh.
are ultra rare 125-pound globes. There's
Mhm.
only like 5 pairs known. Anything above 100 on Jackson globes is considered like a unicorn. And
And
I've
just so
always loved them, and that's why I wrote up that whole thing on Jackson globes.
well, I mean, Jackson Globes on their own, any increment
Yeah,
are more rare. I would say, I don't think I'd get many arguments saying this, much more rare than York Globes, Buns and Globes, and much more rare than, just about most others. I mean, there's some others that get up there.
yeah,
Good globes are pretty valuable and rare. There's others, but we're not talking. I mean, it's hard to find York buns and globes, but
you're right.
Jacksons are a whole different level in terms of rarity. So then, with that context in mind, that he made them up to 100 pounds and they were super rare, you're talking beyond that. So the
Yeah, because it's
125s,
100, and then it's 110,
wow,
115, I think 115, 120, 125, and that's it. But like
wow,
no other globe maker made anything above 100 to my knowledge. So,
yeah. So that puts it in its
and they're
own
all
kind of
obviously those kind of weights are special order.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are globes that exist or like thick handled globes and things that are more than 100 pounds. But in
Yep.
terms of like a barbell manufacturer, like a barbell company, there's no one that made them regularly over 100 pounds. So then
Mhm.
how did you come across these 125
Yeah.
pound Jackson globes? You just trip
So,
over them at
so
a yard
the
sale?
story of them and then the subsequent ones is
Okay.
pretty cool. So the 125s on Super Bowl Sunday 2 years ago, someone just posted, a picture in the Vintage Weights Physical Culture group, and it was just like 125, but it didn't say Jackson, or maybe there was one picture that said Jackson. And I just everyone obviously, like, this was a public posting. Once it gets
Yeah.
posted in the group, everybody sees it. And basically, there were some higher offers, but I was the only one willing to just show up there 4 hours later with cash in hand.
Wow.
And so I figured, I was like, I can get home for the game. I can get there by,
Yeah.
1 o'clock, and then I can be home around 4 or 5, and I can still watch the Super Bowl. So I
I
left
love how
by
you
this
clocked it
hour,
out. Yeah.
and I had to be like, please don't sell these. I'm about to embark on a
Yeah.
3.5 hour drive to Rhode Island
I've
area.
been there. Yeah.
And luckily he honored it, because he did have like
Nice.
significantly higher offers as I was on my way, but they were
Yeah.
like wanting it to be shipped.
Ah,
So that's
and
the story of the 125s. And
nice.
it was a widow of this local weightlifting legend in Rhode Island named Jerry Farelli. he had like forearms that were literally like this big.
I can imagine if
He's
he
in
had
the Rhode
125
Island
pound globes.
weightlifting Hall of Fame when he was
Yeah.
younger. He set some records. He was in a picture, I think, on like Iron Man magazine as a
Okay.
teen. Big name back in the day. And so that was pretty cool. And she
Yeah.
was going to use the money because I paid significant amount of
Yeah.
money. She was going to use that to buy his headstone. So that was a
Oh,
pretty cool.
wow. I think I remember reading that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
and I
that's
wrote
where the
up
money was going.
details of the whole
Yeah.
thing, but how I got the 85s
Yeah.
and 100s is actually something I haven't revealed. And then I figured
Nice.
if your listeners are still listening, I'm going to
Yes.
reveal a trade secret.
They're
I'm
the
not going to
true at
post it.
heart. You know,
I'm
they are
not
the
posting this because no one else deserves
nice.
to hear it. So trade secret
Okay.
is persistence.
Ah.
So shortly after, and you'll hear why. Shortly after I posted all that,
Hmm.
someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, I used to lift with the 85s and 100s that went with that set." I'm like, "What do you mean went with that set?" He's like, "Yeah, my buddy has them. They were all Jerry's back in the day, and he has them." And I'm like, oh wow, I would love to make him an offer and reunite the three dumbbells. Like, can you tell me more? And this guy was like a bad communicator. He was just the guy that knew the guy who had them.
Jeez.
The owner did not have a smartphone, just a flip phone, so I could
Okay.
never get pictures to know. And he just stopped answering. So basically, every month and a half, I would just like check in and be like, just a reminder, like, because I was worried that someone else may be doing the same
Yeah.
thing. Just a reminder, I'm still interested. Can we connect? And like we were very close, and then finally, after 6 months, he sent really bad pictures, and they looked a little beat up, but that was huge. They existed. They were there.
Yeah.
Then he like went dark for another
Proof of
few months.
life.
He got injured.
Oh
Um,
no.
and like the owner changed cell phone number. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, it's been 9 months now.
Yeah.
I don't want to think I'm ever gonna get them because then I'll be too hurt if it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But trade secret, you just got to keep like messaging them every few months.
Yeah.
And so the backstory of these dumbbells, Jerry Ferrelli, he buys from Andy Jackson randomly 85s, 100s, 125s. He puts them at a local gym in Rhode Island called Bodyworks. He just has them off to the side. They're his. Nobody touches them because only Jerry gets to lift them. He has that kind of respect. I heard a story like someone was benching 225. He asks if he can work in. He walks up and straight curls it. This is the guy you do not want to mess with if you look at the pictures from that original post I made. So then one day, like Jerry like decides to just move on. Maybe he moved out of the area, and he told the gym owner that you can keep those dumbbells. I don't need them where I'm going. He was getting a little older, and so they just sat at the gym for a while, and then someone in that area who like knew of Jerry but didn't know Jerry, he was a foundry worker, and he actually traded 2 pairs of York deep dish for the 85s, 100s, and 125s that he made himself apparently at Fairmount Foundry, but in Rhode Island. This is what he said to me. And so he brought those 3 pairs. So there was Vintage Weights trading. This is like in the late 80s, 90s. He brings those 3 dumbbells back to his yard. And him and his buddies in the 90s and early 2000s used to lift these bells. But he basically said that like back then, they would like be in a circle at a party and like drinking, smoking, lifting all in one. And then the bells kind of just like ended up on the ground outside for the next 30 years.
Oh, wow.
This is from the 80s, like until 2024. And literally one of them had some mold on it, some moss on it. And because they had all grown older. These are now like 60-year-old, 70-year-old guys, maybe 60-year-old. And they were just there. And that's how the guy knew, like you know, I know those other two dumbbells are part of the set because at some point, Jerry comes back in town, and for whatever reason, even though he's like 60, 70, he says he finds out like where these guys are, and he just comes to them and he says, I'd like to get those $1.25 back. Not the other two pairs, not the hundreds or 85s.
Yeah.
Just randomly wanted the 125. So, you know, when you see Jerry, like you respect Jerry. He took the 125s back to his home, you know, decade later, passed away. That's the, you know, where I got them. But then when I learned of these hundreds and 85s, I was persistent, and it actually took about a year and a half in totality of me consistently following up to set up the meeting. I drove the 3.5 hours with no negotiation, no price in mind. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I was praying that I would walk away with the dumbbells. So they actually invited me into his house. They like made his wife made cheese and crackers, listening to stories. And I'm thinking my wife is home, like wondering where the hell I am all day. Then after about an hour of just hanging there, I'm like, should we talk business? And they're like, oh yeah, you probably want to get out of here. So I made an offer, and I walked away with a pair of 100s and 85s. And it's like, it's a trade, in my opinion, that's a trade secret. Like, if you know of a lead, don't give up on it. I was tactful about it. It's not like I was harassing the guy. I just casually checked in and then backed off for another 2 months, 3 months.
And all that costs you is a couple seconds of your time. It's not like you're continually sending gifts or something. You're just checking in. You're just sending a message. Hey, you know, just seeing if you want to, you know, maybe sell those weights, or you're thinking about, you know. And
honestly, and I haven't even like posted, these are the most beautiful Jackson.
Oh, look at those. I can't believe those were sitting outside for like decades.
It's so,
look at that. It's such a clean casting. Like, look how smooth that is.
It's like the best Jackson I've ever seen.
That, and look how strong you are, Noam. That I'm over here with my standard collars that I'm holding up. You're hoisting like which one is that? Is that the 85?
85.
Yeah, you're just casually lifting an 85 up to the camera.
Yeah, they're my new favorite dumbbells. Like, I love them. They're just so beautiful.
Oh, the casting's so clean. It's yeah, really, really nice.
I had to soak them in oxalic acid.
Yeah,
and then I do this thing with after the oxalic acid, I like boiled linseed oil.
Yeah, I've tried that.
I let it dry for like 2 weeks, and then I wipe it down. And I couldn't letter them because I didn't want to mess up. That lettering.
Do you dilute the linseed oil at all?
No,
because
I didn't.
Well, then where I went wrong the first time I tried it was, apparently you can dilute it, or you can do what you did where you let it go for like a couple weeks. I was looking for like, all right, I'm going to finish these weights up in like 24 hours. And I was like, oh, look, this is so much cheaper than buying 3-in-1 oil. I'm going to get some of this boiled linseed oil. I put that stuff on there and I was like, oh gosh, like it was so thick. And but that's because I was coming back to it like the next day and trying to wipe it off.
You literally
like, oh my gosh.
Over a week, honestly, I waited.
Yeah. But they look so nice. Yeah.
It's still a little sticky. But what I learned with the 125s and originally the York globes that I did is like the boiled linseed oil, once it does dry, you never have to re-oil them. Like 3 years later, and maybe like some coloring has started to change. Some brown has started to come through, but it's not like crusty rust ever. So I like that because I hate the crusty rust.
Yeah. No, I think it's well worth the wait and the effort that goes into the boiled linseed oil for something that you intend on keeping in the long haul, you know, for sure. You know, you were mentioning flipping weights. I don't, if I'm just trying to clean something up and post it back on Facebook Marketplace to get a profit, I don't think I'm going to wait a couple weeks for the linseed oil to stop being sticky.
I would never.
So
when I was flipping, I was like soaking if needed, but really just rattle canning the plates. But
were you the guy who
they were happy? Like,
oh yeah, they're like, oh, that looks brand new.
I take pride in that whole time period because so many people came. And I logged over 500 transactions, and they were like, "Thank you so much. Everyone's selling at $2 a pound. I was selling at like 1.5 so that I could
Yeah.
churn the volume. And they were so happy and they were like, oh, this is great. They don't, a lot of people were like, I don't
I
care what it looks like, but these are repainted. This is so good.
I did the same thing. Almost 4 years ago now, we finished our basement and I knew that like, okay, I used to have like a Marcy like squat stand wedged between like the water heater and the furnace down in like a grimy, like unfinished basement. Whereas then I was like, okay, this is my chance. Like and I basically flipped weights to raise the money for the gym. And when people come in my gym and they're like, oh my gosh, how much money did this cost? I'm like, well, actually it was free. Like I might have made a
Yeah.
profit at this point.
Well,
So
at some point, my gym was free and most of
yeah,
the stuff was like free. But then at some point, when you
sure.
start deep diving into like premium collection,
Yeah.
I feel like you trade it all back.
Well, the same thing happens with any type of modern equipment that's nicer. Like
Yeah.
upgraded some of my stuff instead of like the Matador dip station from Rogue. I got rid of that and then I saved up and got Mutant Metals UDA and I love it. So, yeah, even the modern stuff you can upgrade. That happens. But I think the story of persistence is 100% true. I mean,
Yeah.
there's there's someone I'm still talking to after over a year now, where that's basically what I'm doing. And I don't want to say too
I
much
have
about it,
one.
but
Yeah, that's why I was hesitant
it's,
to
you
tell the
know,
story because like I still follow up with someone I've been talking to for like two and
yeah,
a half years. Every
exactly.
like 3 to 4
Yeah.
months.
Just,
Or
hey,
one
how's
person
it
I just
going?
messaged, it was a year later, and I just said, hey, just checking in. They
Yeah.
still have the weights. And
Yeah.
so yeah, you never know where that leads. One day they might want to sell.
I also think I am that person for a couple people because I do have some weights in my gym that every couple months or so I won't name any names. I don't want to
Yeah.
embarrass anyone, but every month or so I'll get a message like, hey, so you think you might want to sell those? Like, and it's always like a casual, like, hey, how you doing? We haven't chatted for a while. And then like they come out and they ask about the same weights in my gym. And I'm like, nope, don't want to sell them. I'm keeping them. So yeah, I am that person for
As long
one
as people
one or
do it
two.
tactfully, I think it's
Yeah,
fine. Like
I
when
think so.
one of my holy grail for the longest time was the Paramount deep dish. And
Yeah,
3 years ago, there was like, one or two pairs on the East Coast because a lot of them hadn't been unearthed yet.
yeah.
And so basically, I tracked down in all the old posts on both the York Group and Iron History, like who had them, and I knew like
Yeah.
the 5 people in the country that had them, and I like would casually just try and track, like ask if they would ever be available, and then luckily eventually got them. But sometimes, like if it's something that rare, and at the time it was, you
Yeah,
really just have to kind of know who has what. If you ever want a chance at getting some of
sure.
these grail items.
And yeah, I mean, we should plug some of these places that we mentioned too. That yeah, the old bodybuilding.com forums is where I first started reading about vintage weights, and
Mhm,
they're still up. So if you search like bodybuilding.com,
mhm.
vintage York, for example, you can read, and now these are like 15 years old or 10 years old
Wow,
at this point, but I mean, you could read way back. And then Iron History is still up, and
I love that site.
there's
That's a
like a
wealth of knowledge.
wall,
Yeah,
but it is, oh my gosh, it's a library worth of
you
knowledge
have
or
to
more.
you have to deep dive into a
You
lot of
do.
old.
I mean, you start digging and you can spend a whole day or more just going and going and going. And it's wonderful, but you do have to either make a donation to get
I
full
do it. I just
access.
do the
And
donation
I
every
do
year.
it. I
No,
think
it's
it's
tough.
$20. I have it on auto renew. It's like $20 a
It's
year or
worth it to
something.
me because that is actually a lot of where you get some of the history you won't find anywhere else.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned the Facebook groups. We've had a big shakeup recently on Facebook.
I
Several
know.
groups have closed or merged. I don't know the proper term, but so now the two groups that are left are Vintage Weights and Physical Culture and Vintage
Vintage
York
York
Barbell.
owners. I'm
Yeah,
proud that I'm a moderator of both actually.
there you go. I was
Um,
just gonna say you've got your foot in both camps.
I
So
like all
yeah,
the people that run both
yeah,
of them and the
yeah,
moderators, both of them.
yeah.
Really good. I've developed some really good friendships. It's unfortunate that they're a year or over a year ago was a split. But I think two groups is like healthy.
I
I
do
don't view
too.
them as competing. I just view them as like two separate resources. Some people prefer one, some people prefer the other.
I
And
mean,
then there's YouTube, and then you own that space.
I wouldn't say I own that space because I mean, now there's
But
other
you
people.
posted, someone like
Mm.
literally posted, because many people have made Facebook posts on like restoration,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
someone literally posted the other day, like, where can I find a YouTube video of the
Yeah,
restoration?
yeah.
That's why I say you own
Well,
it,
thank
because
you.
you took the time to
Yeah,
like edit the videos and put those types of videos. And some people prefer consuming video content, which is
yeah.
awesome. I remember when you started and
Appreciate it.
like you put in a lot of
Yeah.
effort into all of your videos, which is
I'm
cool.
still learning, man. I mean, there's it's unless you really like studied this stuff and you had some type of like training, some type of schooling, some type of job that you did this stuff. um yeah, there's a lot to learn, so I'm still learning. And you can go back and watch some of my earlier videos and oh my gosh, it's like, why is he doing this? Why is this track repeating the same 10-second loop over and over? Like there's sometimes I get comments on the older ones and that's what I reply. I'm like, well, I was just learning, like I still am. So yeah, I'm still learning, but I'm really fortunate that there's so many friendly people. You mentioned like your good friends in both groups. I have good friends in both groups as well,
Mhm.
that have become friends beyond just like collecting and trading weights, like guys that, I consider friends that I'd hang out with. And I'm a member of both of the Facebook groups and enjoy them. And I think even with the YouTube videos, the reason I was able to make those videos or put stuff on my website or do the podcast, whatever, is because people help me out, and I try to give them a shout out and give them a thank you every time I can. So, it's kind of collectively learning from other people and then putting your own spin on things. That's what's kind of added up for me. And I think on YouTube as well and as on Instagram, there's other people coming to it. I was far from the first on Instagram. There's lots of people that were on Instagram. Effin was on Instagram long before me, but I think now there's newer people on Instagram, like Potter is on there, and he's been putting
Yeah,
out
he's a good
stuff.
one. And I think
And
his profession has something to do with video editing, so he makes some nice, cool videos.
makes really cool videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, really nice photography, really cool videos. Nate, I mentioned Deep Dish Globes on Instagram,
Oh yeah, I love it.
puts out really fun stuff, cool
I got a
stuff.
small tidbit about Nate and Deep and Globes. So remember that first 100 York that I found that really just set things off for me. I had to know everything
Yeah.
about it. Well, I couldn't pair it for the longest time, and I wanted two 100s. So
Uh-huh.
ultimately, I just bought a pair of 100s,
Yeah.
and then I had the original single. And then finally, after you buy the pair, I find
There
I
it
find
is.
single. So now I've got four 100-pound globes,
Yeah.
and I actually did a trade one of my 100-pound globe pairs uh, in a trade with Nate. So he has that one now. My
Awesome.
first vintage pickup ever.
That's where it's located. Nice.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I think it's even in the short time that I've been on Instagram and that I've been on YouTube, um, I've seen growth in the vintage weights and strength history community. And I've met some other people like Golden Era Bookworm has been on the podcast.
Mhm.
He's been making strength history videos for a long time before me
Oh,
on
your
YouTube.
guests are pretty awesome, especially the ones that are entrepreneurs, small business owners. Like
Yeah.
this podcast is going to be nothing compared to
No.
their stories, but yeah, you got to keep your guest list
So
is all.
well, I think Carlos from Golden Era Bookworm, he was the archival historian for the Arnold documentary. So just
Mhm.
hearing him talk about like how he traveled to Arnold's hometown and
Yep, yep.
how he, researched everything and sent all the magazine clippings and everything. Well, not clippings, but all the newspaper clippings, I should say, and magazine scans and everything for the Netflix documentary. He's been nothing but friendly with me. So there's so many people I could keep going on and on that I think it's just nice to see the community growing and get more people on Instagram and get more people on YouTube putting out content. So even just
And then
people
the
that,
community is growing. I can
yeah,
tell you as the moderator in both groups, like
yeah,
the amount of requests daily have exploded recently. I'm not going to
that's
give
awesome.
Efren all the credit for the Brian Shaw video, but that
Yeah,
actually, to be honest, was a huge catalyst.
yeah,
And yeah, we're just getting, requests, you know, every 10 minutes there's like a new person joining. So that
yeah.
group's gonna be like at 5,000 within a couple months, in my opinion.
Well, I think the real challenge is going to be maintaining the quality of the groups as the population grows. Just like scaling a business, because I talk when I have small business owners on here, that often comes up. Like, well, I mentioned Mutant Metals. I talked about that with Chris from Mutant Metals. I've talked about that
Mhm.
with Steve Cleva from Cleva Built. Um, it's a challenge. And Mike from Microgains, scaling your business is a challenge. How do you keep the quality as you grow? And I was thinking about it the other day when it comes to Facebook groups, with the vintage groups that I really love, that like, how do you keep the quality of what's happening? And, I guess I just throw it out there to you. How do you do that since you're a moderator in both groups?
Oh, like the quality of the content.
Quality of the content. How do you keep some of the iron elitists, as you would call them, from getting too
Yeah.
angry when a new guy constantly
So
posts like,
believe it or
hey,
not,
are these worth it much?
the moderators in both groups spend a significant amount of time brainstorming on like ways to improve content and the community aspect, like what
Okay.
types of posts we should be making, how to drive engagement. Like this is all for free. Like none of us are
Yeah.
profiting off this, but we want to see the community thrive and grow. We want someone who's brand new who like has a billard that might not be, worth something or coveted or collectible. We don't want to discourage them by getting like hate right away for
Yeah.
posting an innocent question. So we're
Yeah.
constantly actually thinking of like, what posts should we, keep up? What sections should we create to streamline things? Like you saw in the vintage weights and physical culture, there's now like a listings,
Uh-huh.
buy and sell
The buy
thing,
sell.
and it's kind of organized in that manner. There's like in search of thread. There's going to be a new type of section coming out. Not going to spill any beans, but
Yeah.
there's always like new sections.
Okay.
And then the York group is a little bit more old school, where we kind of
Yeah.
keep things the way they were, because the people of that group have maybe a different perspective and like it
Yeah.
the way it was. So yeah, that's kind of the job of the moderator, besides letting approving people to join, thinking of like how to drive engagement.
Sounds good. I mean, I think that's a
Because
good
we all want to see the
spin on it.
community grow. It's like it's
Yeah,
good for everyone.
exactly.
More
But
people, more fun.
I, I absolutely agree. And I think, the Shaw video you mentioned, I've had some people ask me like, "Oh, is it really annoying that like Shaw's, getting all this credit, getting all this whatever, vintage weights, this and that?" I said, "No, it's amazing. Like it's great. Like he's bringing a lot of attention to something that I love. I think it's awesome that
Naturally, I read
he's
every
into it."
single comment on that video. I think a
Yeah.
lot of us
You're
probably.
scrolling through.
It's
Yeah.
so positive. Like it's
Yeah.
so amazing. They love that. Shaw loves it. They
Yeah.
see how knowledgeable Efren is and
Yep.
his passion, and clearly he like takes
Well,
pride in this. He has kind of different display sections set up, so everything about it, everyone was happy with. So
also Shaw, when he picked up the globes and then
mhm.
when he picked up the deep dish, I mean, Shaw's kind of got like a series of vintage weights that he's
I know.
collecting here.
Rumor has it, he
Oh,
needs globes beyond the York set of 0 to 100,
look at
and
that.
there's only a few people that have
Yeah.
that
You might
125.
get a visit. There'll be a large hand knocking on your door.
I
So
know.
yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that I think it's great. It brings knowledge to it because immediately since he titled the one, I think it was he titled it like the world's rarest globe
Yeah,
dumbbells or something, and it's the York set, which
he has
20
provocative titles to
yeah,
drive the viewers in, but it's okay.
exactly. And that's you took the words out of my mouth. That's what I got a fair amount of people saying like, "Are you going to let him know this and that?" I said, first of all, this man doesn't know who the heck I am. Like, there's no way possible I can let Brian Shaw know anything besides dropping a comment on his video the same way you would. And second of all, once we set that aside, no, I don't. I think it's just a provocative YouTube title to get people to view it that might not view it otherwise. And that in itself is why I like what he's doing, because he's
Maybe you need to take
bringing.
a page out of his book and come up with some good titles.
I really do. Yeah. Well, if anyone's interested in jumping into the Facebook groups, I'll drop links to both of them, Vintage
Oh, yeah.
Weights and Physical Culture and Vintage York Barbell owners. And you don't have to be a York Barbell owner. You could like any, weight
Yeah,
plates
that
and
one's just the
any
legacy name,
brand.
but it's
Yeah,
all weights and stuff like that.
exactly. And then,
There's some overlap of people, and then there's
sure.
some not. But there's a
Yep.
lot of good content on both groups, and when I say good content, it's like it's a wide variety. You could just see someone's local, steal of a pickup
Hmm.
that gives you inspiration to hunt on marketplace
Yeah.
because you want to find something. You could see someone's full steps on their restoration process,
Yeah.
or like I've done in the past, if I really care about like some of the weights and the history behind it, I'll try and like research the history. Like those posts don't happen overnight. Like it took a lot of time to put it together, and I'm not the only one who's kind of done that. So you get a mix of like questions from newbies,
Yeah.
history, like a lot of historical stuff, the restoration, or just questions. It's fun. Yeah. And some people have beautiful displays that really actually are inspiring.
There's a lot of things that I've done in my gym that I got the inspiration from seeing other people post theirs. So yeah, that's true as
And I,
well.
I love this whole stuff. So I talked about like my weightlifting from early years,
Yeah.
and then the vintage weights, kind of merging that affinity with the history of physical culture. And then now I
Yeah.
just think about vintage weights like all day.
Yeah.
I can't stop thinking about it. I come down here and I work out every day, maybe even twice a day with my treadmill. And then I'm surrounded by the weights, and I'm just like, I love it.
I mean, there's something relaxing about
Yeah.
being in my gym. It's just my space. I like it. So yeah. And that's why I like doing this podcast because, and talking with people online, because in my everyday life, I don't even know that many people that lift weights, let alone people that like old weights or like strength history. So, I mean, that's my greedy kind of inspiration for doing this, is that it just finds me people to talk to about all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on, Noam.
Yeah.
I
It was
mean,
a lot of fun, to be honest.
it was great to dig into Dan Lurie history, learn a little bit about your collecting.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate the exclusive on the trade secret. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome too.
Hopefully someone listening to this realizes that they know of someone who wasn't selling weights a year ago,
Yeah,
but still has them. And maybe a follow-up leads to a big acquisition. So good luck, everyone.
absolutely. So yeah, listeners, drop a comment and let us know if there's anything interesting you heard or anything you found in the wild recently you want to share with me and Noam. Are you working on some persistent buys? Are you tactfully
Nothing as good
checking
as
in?
that. Yeah, I have like I literally, because what's very weird is that you make a big pickup,
Uh-huh.
and actually, crazy story, an anomaly, I got 35s and 50s in a separate Jackson pickup that was posted to the groups. Somehow, long story short, somehow, even though 30, 40 people messaged the seller, I walked away with them. But the
Hey.
combination of getting 4 new pairs of Jacksons in a month, now I'm like so invigorated and
Yeah.
hungry to get more, whether it's having to pay up or hunt. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't hunting for over a year. I was still like looking on Facebook, but I wasn't hunting on Marketplace. Now I'm hunting again, coming
Yeah.
out of retirement to like
Coming out of retirement. Watch out.
hungry. So basically, I have followed up on old leads. None
Yeah.
of them seem promising. So I'm just back to the true wild grind.
It's the way to go. And that's a lot of times when people ask me, how do you find all these? I say sometimes they find me. Like if you just get involved and you just start looking and
Oh,
looking and
like the
looking.
video of your biggest pickup to date. Yeah. With the
Exactly. I
comment
mean,
that led to your Jacksons.
yeah, he found me. I didn't find them. So I think, and I'm not saying you got to go out there and start making YouTube videos, but I just
Yeah.
mean if you join these Facebook groups, like some
Mhm.
of Noam's biggest pickups came from these Facebook groups. If you join these Facebook
Exactly.
groups and you learn about things, then you learn what you're looking for and what you like and what you want to find. And then you also start to make friends and you start to learn more about it because I mean, I've learned more from talking with people than I have from just Googling things because for a lot of stuff, there's just not a lot of information printed that's out there. So hopefully this episode has helped some people learn a little bit more about Dan Lurie and learn a little bit more about vintage weights.
Yeah.
Um, if you're listening and you want to help out the channel and help out the podcast, make sure you follow us on whatever platform you're listening to. Follow, subscribe. If you're on, Spotify, give us a rating and help us
And
out
buy
on
vintage
YouTube.
games.
That's right. And vintage gains. That's right. Hey, I mean, it's not a 45-pound deep dish plate, but technically I have developed a weight. So
Pretty
vintage
awesome.
gains.
I give
Thanks,
you a
man.
lot of credit for bringing a product to market. That's like a very hard.
I
So
I just got today, actually. I just got my little on my little business account. I got my little royalty payment, if you will. And it's not. I'm clearly not retiring anytime soon.
I know you're reinvesting a lot of anything you
Yeah.
make into your this whole
Well,
thing,
yeah.
but yeah,
Pretty much right now, I'm breaking even. I pay for my website and I pay for my Zoom
awesome.
account. That's about it. But I texted my wife, "Hey, 4 months, they're still selling. Like I'm still here." So I mean, I'm just happy that like a couple sets are selling here and there, and that we're still going. Mike just had to restock the quarter-pound one, so I didn't think we'd make it to a restock and sell out of a increment this soon. So yeah, the sales have been good, and I feel like I'm still trying to get the knowledge out there. They're just magnetic calibration plates. They make it easy and simple for you to bring your plates up to weight or to pair up a mismatched plate pair that has a really heavy one. You can at least make it weigh the same, 46 pounds each instead of off. And they're removable as well. So when I cycle in some of my older plates, I'll put them on for the week that I'm using them, and then I'll take them off and then put my weights back up on the rack. So yeah, vintage gains, go
That's
check them
awesome.
out. And thank you for the
I,
compliment. I
yeah,
appreciate
I
it,
find
man.
it really cool that you brought that to market. So
I owe a lot to my partner, Mike, at Microgains too. And we'll both be at Home Gym Con. I'm going to definitely hang out at the Microgains booth and we'll have vintage gains
that
there.
looks like it's going to be so much bigger than last year, which I know
It
was a big
is
that's from what you told me. So that's so cool.
humongous. Yeah, much bigger. So, hey, thanks, Noam. I hope you can come out
You're
to Home Gym
welcome.
Con
Thanks
in the
for having
future.
me. I feel honored to come on
Yeah.
because I don't have a cool story like most of your guests. So thanks.
Don't sell yourself short. Your story was great.
Yeah.
Absolutely enjoyed it. Thanks, man.